Hi, welcome to In the Garden. I'm your host, Joyce Hochsprung. I'm a Cloud County Master Gardener. And with us today is Janet Dolezal. She's also a Master Gardener, and she has been superintendent at the county fair for the Horticulture Department for a long time. And she's going to talk to us today about preparing your exhibits for the fair, how to stage them, how to clean them, what to cut, what to look for, and a few tips and tricks too.
I've been a master gardener for, I think it's over 45 years, and then also about 45 years I've been judging. I'm a certified horticulture judge with the state of Minnesota, where I've taken classes and have to continue taking continue classes to keep certification. And I judge open class in 4-H in many counties in the state. Should we start with our new changes?
Sure, maybe you want to talk about some of the changes that have happened this year at
Okay,
the fair.
some of the big change this year is McLeod County is only going to have a 4-day fair, so our entry day is changed. We're still going to be taking entries on Tuesday, August 17th, but that will be from noon till 7 o'clock. So that means by 7 o'clock, everybody must have their entries in and tagged and on the ready for judging. And then on Wednesday is going to be our judging day. We're going to start judging at 9:30 in the morning until we're done. So those are the two new changes on the times. And then also, if you get your premium book, you can pick it up in the fair office, or you can go online and you can start checking your entries in that. There are going to be two new classes this year in the flower division. One of them is photography in the garden, where it's a 5x7 picture of like children in the garden, animals or birds in the garden, a close-up of a flower. And then also we have an herb division this year, where there will be specimens of different kinds of herbs and the potted plants. So those are two new divisions that we have this year in our premium list.
Oh, wow, there are some new changes coming. Well, would you like to start first with prepping your vegetables or the flowers?
I think we'll start with the flowers. We have them out here.
Okay.
Okay, so one of the first things I like to do is when I get my premium book is to go through it and walk through my garden to see what I have and to what possibly will be blooming during the fair. And then I will take a piece of paper and write down this flower and go through my premium book and then compare it and keep watching my flowers to see if they're going to be ready at that time. And then also you have to, we do want you to pre-enter, and those pre-entries are to be in by August 14th. And you can either do that by paper or online. And even if
what happens? I know people sometimes ask, well, I don't know what's going to be blooming then. So should they go ahead and enter it anyway? And then what happens if they don't have it?
Yeah, enter everything what you think you might have. And just enter it, and then if you do not have it, all you do is when you come to the fair on entry day, tell us you don't have it, and then we can just take your card and pull it out, and it's going to be so much easier, because it takes a while to enter it, going it through the computer, getting everything printed, and it's so much easier if you enter and then just tell us that you don't have it when you come on entry day.
Okay. And are they still going to be able to do a few entries if they forgot something on the day of on entry day?
We will take 10 or less entries on entry day that you have not pre-entered.
Okay. Well, why don't we get started with talking about flowers, what stage to cut them in, how to prep them, how to stage them when you bring them, and some of those kinds of things.
Okay, what I do is like 1 or 2 days before the fair, I will take a container such as this and I would fill it pretty close to full with lukewarm water. And I go into the garden, and you should either have a very sharp knife or I have this nipper. This is a florist nipper. So when I use this, it does not squish the stems like ordinary scissors will squeeze the stems and damage them. So you go with your nipper and warm bucket of water, and you go into the garden either in the morning or later in the afternoon, and that's when the flowers have the most water in their heads. If you go out during noontime, the sun has taken the water and it has just evaporated out of the stem, and then they will not last very long if you cut them during the noontime. So go in the morning or evening. Like I went out yesterday morning and with my bucket, and this is like some of the examples that I had picked in there.
Okay. So in other words, don't cut them and have them sitting out in the sun like we're doing right now.
No, this is bad right now. And
So
then when
is it a good idea to water them like the night before or the day before you
that would help, because they would bring more moisture, especially now when we have such dry weather. Then they will have more wet water into the stems before you do cut them, and then it will
Okay.
soak up. And then put them in the house, like in a cool basement or a refrigerator. But if you put them in the refrigerator, make sure there's no apples in there, because the gas from the apples will damage the blooms. So then when you're getting ready to select your flowers to be put in for the exhibit, let's see, I'll start with the sedum. Now when I pick my stems, I take a very long stem. This was cut nearly to the ground because you need to remove leaves that are going to be below the water line when you put it in a container. So you make sure that you got enough long stems on your flower. And then you're going to remove leaves until, like if you use this bottle, this one is too small, but this is an example of you need a tall enough stem so you have a lot of leaves on there, because leaves do count for points towards judging. And you should have a bottle that's bigger, because so it isn't too tippy like this. But if you have
something more like this one maybe?
yeah, okay. Like here's a taller stem, and then maybe if I take one more leaf off, then it's going to stand pretty good in there. But if you need, let's see if to make it straight, there are wedges at the fairgrounds. We have some wedges made out of foam, and you can stick a wedge in here, and that will make your stem stand straight up, and that's what we want for judging. We want a nice straight standing stem. Now looking at this sedum, the leaves all are very nice. There aren't any holes in here, wormholes, but if there was maybe one or two little pieces of damage on the leaves, still leave those leaves on. You'll have some points taken off, but it's better to leave the leaf on than to take it off. And then looking at the head, now sedum should be in full color during judging time. They're quite small this year. The heads of flowers aren't really nice like they should be, and it should be in full color. You could exhibit this, but it will not get a top rating as if it would be put in a full color. Okay, and here's the phlox. That's another one that I picked down to the ground. You want the straight stem, and then I will be removing leaves again, especially like this has damage on there. And then you should recut at an angle. And then again too, place it in your container, and if it needs a wedge, to wedge it. Now this one might need two wedges in here to hold it straight. Now when you have phlox, you want to look at them from head on, and you want to make sure that the flowers are in full bloom around the whole head. And if it's got some that are falling off, you just go and shake it, because these phlox, they keep dropping these little florets all the time, and you want them not to be on your plant during judging time. So this one is not the very best quality. It probably would be like a red ribbon because there's too many buds that are not open. It should be more fully open during judging time. Then your celosa, you would find a smaller container for that. Again, too, we need leaves. All flowers should have flowers and leaves because the leaves count about 50% of the points that are given for the plant for specimen for judging. Now you want...
May I interrupt you a minute, Janet? I know some of the varieties of astilbe, the bloom stem does not have any leaves. So
yeah, there's some that don't have leaves, such as
your hosta blooms.
Hosta and some lilies and that don't have leaves, and that's permissible. If it does not have leaves, then it don't have to have the leaves
Okay.
on. But it grows naturally with leaves, it's got to have leaves on.
Okay.
And this one was just picked this morning, so you can tell it wasn't conditioned.
Right.
It wasn't put in the warm water to sit for a while. So this is what happens when they're not conditioned, is they get droopy like this.
Because they can't take up water fast
They
enough.
haven't had the water yet to go up into the head. But otherwise, it would be a pretty good specimen. It has nice color, and it's got the buds coming here to have nice flowers showing on it. Okay, and then there's some zinnias here. Okay, we got 3 different kinds here. All 3 have leaves on, which is good. This has a little bit damage, but still it's better to leave it on than to take it off. This one could have been cut a little bit longer so it would stand up because it's a larger type flower, and that usually has a longer stem. But this year the stems might be shorter because of the weather. They aren't growing the way they should.
Can you talk a little bit about what stage it's best to cut the zinnias in?
Some of these are starting to show that they're a little bit past the prime because this yellow in here is starting to show, and these petals are kind of coming out. But one way, if you have 2 of them that are really nice and the 3rd one is showing some of these little flowers that are coming up, take a tweezer and patiently take these out.
See, I told you we were going to learn some new tricks.
So this way now you don't see that they were removed. See, it just removes those little yellow, little tiny flowers that are coming up out of there. This one, the center is kind of, there's petals coming where they really shouldn't.
It would not be a winner.
No, but it's not bad. Because sometimes we find at the fairs, the large zinnias, there aren't too many entries in that division. There's usually more that are smaller than that. Like now this one here, the stem should have been a little bit longer and it would have been better because it's not long enough, and it has a nice set of leaves. Compared to these, do have some damage. So probably this one here would place a little bit higher because of the damage in the leaves. But if that's all that you have, I mean, I would enter it. Okay, I got a couple silk flowers here because of the roses. You're talking, you have also in the book, they'll say 1 bloom. So that means there's only 1 flower gonna bloom. Or if you have 3 blooms for entry, or you have a 1 stem. A stem means you could have more flowers blooming on that 1 stem. Or there's also then sprays. When you talk about a spray, that's usually a petunia, and that's a whole bunch of flowers on one stem. So kind of know what those mean. Now if it says 1 bloom, it is only 1 bloom. Like now if I would take and enter this one here with this tiny little bud here, even if it just has the slightest little color, it already is called a bloom because there is color showing. So it would have to be removed to be entered as to a bloom.
So just make sure you pay attention to what it says in the premium book, whether it says stem, bloom. Make sure you're following the directions so you don't get your entry disqualified.
Right, and they will be disqualified if you don't have exactly the way it is printed in the list. And because the judges go by that, and that's all that they have to go by, and if it's not exactly what it says, then it will be disqualified. Okay, so while we're talking about the rose here, roses should be exhibited when they're about 3/4 bloom, open. So you can just take newspaper and kind of wrap it around your blossom, and then put tape on there to hold it. And then when you condition it, it's got this paper around there, then the rose will not open up completely. So keep that on there until you get to the entry fairgrounds or whatever. With this paper around there, it's going to keep it from popping open. And like with the roses, they should have leaves also. And we can tell if the roses have been sprayed, so make sure if you have sprayed any of your flowers or anything that spray residue has been washed off. Okay, but a floribunda or a shrub rose or that, they can have one stem with many flowers on there with leaves. Okay, now we're talking about the sprays of the petunias. Now a petunia is a flower that easily picks up dirt and dust on its leaves. You should always make sure all the leaves are washed on your entries, and especially the petunias. And you can put them underneath the sink if you have a sprayer on there, and then just spray off the dirt and dust very carefully so you don't damage the flowers. Now you want flowers blooming and you want buds, but also then you must deadhead all the stems where flowers have bloomed. And people think if they just take the flower out, they've deadheaded it, but they haven't. They have to cut it
Back to
very
the stem.
carefully to the stem. And you got to make sure that you get all of them. And when you call for a spray, the more flowers that you have on your stem in your entry, the better it is. And it also has leaves on here also yet. Now this one is kind of, it either got damaged when it was conditioning or that, but so just carefully cut it off. Okay, now we're talking about the
Rebecca.
Rebecca.
Susan.
And you want to make sure too that you got leaves and a long enough stem. Like this could have been just a little bit longer stem to place in there. And that can have buds and flowers on there. And we want to see, this one is about the perfect condition for entering. It isn't over blossom because these little yellow seed or flowers haven't come out yet. So this one is almost perfect shape for enter, but it could stand more flowers that are open.
Can you tip that a little bit so the camera can see that?
There. And if it had probably a few more stems of open flowers, it would rate probably a little bit higher on judging day. Okay, marigolds is one that you see the most problems where people do not leave the leaves on. They'll pick this flower and they'll probably pick it just about 2-3 inches and no leaves. Now this one was picked down at the ground. They're very short this year, so if you want to maybe enter marigolds, you're probably going to have to cut and ruin your planting, go right to the ground to cut it so you can get a good specimen. This has one bloom now. It really should take the side stem off. It still has 2 leaves on there, and Then when we're going to be entering something small like this, you could probably have to find a little bottle. And these are usually entered, there's 3 or I think these are 5. You have to read your premium book because some have 5 and some have 3. The smaller flowers, the size is usually 5 in there. And then like in marigolds, there's orange, there's yellow, and then there's also single and doubles. So marigolds, you really have to read the book carefully so you get the right number in there.
So, but in general, the smaller the flower, the more stems are going to be required, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's listed because, and then, you know, to make sure you need a ruler during when you're picking up to measure to make sure that you're in the right size requirements for your entry. When you have the smaller ones too, usually it calls for a stem and there can be several flowers on there, and then the large pom-pom or the larger ones, they usually are just one flower. Now this one, it has several that are kind of dead already, so these should be nipped off. But actually this is not a very good specimen because there's only one flower that's open. These should be more open. Like here I have one. This one was a plant. Somebody gave me a plant and it had nice flowers, and I thought this was a good example of what a mum should look like. It should have almost all the flowers on the stem open with leaves and that. Now, when you're talking about flowers that are like on stems, delphiniums, gladiolas, and the hosta flowers, we're going to be looking, you want 1/3 in bloom, 1/3 in colored bud, and then 1/3 in tight buds. So you're going to go 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And you can have at least one flower that has been spent, and you can pick it off very carefully, where you'll now have really a good stem. This one really does not have enough open, and it has too many that have already been spent. But see, there are a flower too that doesn't have leaves, so they're entered without leaves on them.
Okay, and just as a note, I've sometimes helped with taking in the flowers on entry day, and occasionally I have seen people try to tape a leaf onto a stem. You don't want to do that. We know it's not real, that it doesn't belong there. So just, if it doesn't have a leaf, if it's a stem like that type, don't try to add a leaf.
Because we have had that entered where we've had, this one exhibited was a hollyhock and the flower was taped onto the stem. Well, if you can see it, the judge will see it also. So don't try to add anything there. Sometimes if they do break, people have put like a toothpick in the stem to kind of hold it, like in the marigold or zinnia. If it's bent over a bit, if you kind of put a toothpick in there where nobody can see it, I mean, that's permissible.
Okay.
And another thing, okay, when you're getting your flowers ready for the fair, take 1 or 2 extra ones along with you to the fair, because most likely one will get broken on the way. And so you take extra. And one way where I like to carry mine to the fair, I just use this beer container, because then you can put the bottles in here, and like you have your flowers with your stems.
She has to do it.
So I mean, this makes a very handy carrying case for flowers to go to the fair, and they usually don't get damaged, and it's easier to handle.
Yes, and some flowers take more abuse than others. Some are very delicate, and you know, I've found that out over a few years of entering. Some need their own box, own container, own everything. Others you can stick a bunch in a bottle and you're fine. So.
Okay, one flower that really needs a lot of care is your lily.
Yes, I see the Mangavi spirited already, one of the blooms.
Uh-huh.
I see the Mangavi speared one of the blooms and sliced it open already. So
So, okay, yeah, we're looking at these, and what are these against?
this is an Orient pet lily.
Okay, but what?
Oh, the anthers.
The antlers, now they should
Anthers.
be on, but you got to be very careful because they stain. But if you make a flower arrangement, they should be taken off because you don't want them to fall like on your tablecloth or anything because they stain. But in a specimen, they must be on. And this is almost a perfect condition. It's got flowers that are open and it still has buds to go. It's got leaves on there. The only one that this bloom is kind of getting a little bit past, but it isn't bad.
So would you leave that bloom on or remove it?
That could be your choice.
Okay.
And if you want to take it off, you got to be very careful to cut it right next to the stem
So it doesn't leave a
so it doesn't leave like an empty
space
space.
there.
Yeah,
Okay.
because then you would show it like with this as the front. You put your name tag in the front, so they would put it towards the front. But this is a very nice straight stem. I mean, with the amount of flowers that are open, and this is a flower that be, I think, considered as a champion quality because there are so many flowers open. The only damage you might have, okay, right now there's a little tear here.
Yeah, that's where I said I think the Mangavi speared it. Oh,
Yep.
it speared me too.
So, because these are very hard to transport, so you really have to be careful when you're transporting your lilies. Okay, now these are lilies too, which usually don't have a stem, so you would be exhibiting them that way. And this is a very good one because it has so many buds that are coming, and it's in very good shape. But now when you're going to have to watch when you enter, you got to remember judging day is the next day, and if it's a day lily, tomorrow this will be closed.
Right.
So you'll have to have one picked that's going to be ready to open like the next day, because like tomorrow this one might be closed.
Right. And that one that's on there is not going to be open yet tomorrow. It's going to take another day. So you want one where you can kind of,
It's just about ready to pop open.
like this one is probably going to be open tomorrow. It's starting to split at the edge a little bit on the top. So that one should be open tomorrow. So if you were to cut that one, you would have a blooming stem for the next day.
But today this one is in very good shape. But that's why you got to remember now to pick, because we're going to judge the next day. Okay, and then in the coneflowers, again, you want a long enough stem, because sometimes their leaves are way down towards the bottom. They need a long enough stem to fit into the container. And this one has a little chew hole on the leaf, but it isn't bad. It's better than to have it removed. And then people question, okay, now coneflower, what stage should that be in? Is this cone bigger or is it smaller in the center? Well, it's called a coneflower, so that means you want this cone to be a little bit bigger. Then this one is not quite mature enough yet. This one is but at the right stage. But
I think people often think they take the younger one because the color is more intense on it. But coneflowers, as they age, they start to fade. That's just
Right.
what they do. So,
But you're going to be judging then it's the cone. But you got to watch too, if they get too big, then it's getting past its prime already. This is a very good specimen of a stilibee, fair time. I don't know, do you think it's going to be blooming?
no.
No.
There's one later dwarf variety called Pumilla that usually blooms at fair time. And that one I have yet to see a stem with a leaf on, even when you go to the ground. But this variety does.
But right now this is very good because it has open and it still has quite a few buds to open up into a nice bloom. But it could have maybe, if there was another leaf a little bit further down, that would be the only. But it's got one leaf, but one more leaf would be just a little bit better. Okay, with all the kinds of hostas, and we have different sizes, you have to read the premium book to make sure what size you fit in, because the smaller ones up to 2.5 inches are 5 leaves, and then it goes 3 leaves and 2 leaves. It depends on the size. Now, when you're measuring your leaf, you will go across the width. Now, this is to be 2.5 inches or less, and it's just exactly on 2.5 inches. So you make sure that they're all the same size, because we want 5 that are all exactly the same size. It's easier if you can kind of pick them off from one plant, because that way the coloring will be the same, and they're usually more uniform if you can get them all from one plant. And so I picked a bunch of them, and then I will take them and put them one inside the other, and I'm measuring them so they're all exactly the same size.
Can you tilt those a little bit so they can?
So I've got a bunch of them in here, but I know like this one is just a little bit too big, so that one is eliminated. And then another thing you should do is look into the light. Sometimes you find, okay, this one you don't see it, but there's teeny tiny little hole in here, so that one would be eliminated.
And the judges will see it,
And
'cause that's what they're looking for.
this one has 2 tiny little cracks in here. I mean, you don't see it, but when you put it up to light, you will see it. So I would find my 5 that are exactly the same. Now, hostas could be picked 4, 5, 6 days before the fair. So you don't have to worry like the morning of or the day before, you know, because they can be done ahead of time. And so you don't have to stress yourself doing everything the last minute. There's some other flowers too, as you're going through, you can pick them ahead of time, and when you have them conditioned and in a cool place, they will last until you enter them.
What about dirt on the leaves?
Pardon me?
What about dirt on the leaves?
Now they should be washed and very gently under running water, and just rinse them off. And that should be with all your plants. Make sure that you have clean leaves. So then you find a container where you can set them in, and so they show off to their best quality.
Okay, on the variegated hosta leaves, some of the newer varieties, part of their appeal to people is that there's a lot of variation in the variegation. Are you better off not showing those?
No, those are fine, because if they if you know the name, put your name on there, because then the judge would realize that that's what it is, and so then they know that's the characteristics of that plant.
Okay.
So, and it helps too, if you do know names of your plants, put them on the tags, because as people walk by, they're going to say, oh, I like that plant, what is it? So that way the name is on there, and if they want to go and buy it, they know the name and they can buy it for themselves.
Okay.
Your hydrangea. Now, this would be entered under the shrub category. And I just found out to harden this, you dip the stem in alum powder. And
Google
then put
says it differently than we've been saying it, but
into the powder and then into
ALUM.
water. And then the head will stay nice, because if you don't, it's going to get like this was picked just about half an hour ago, and it's already starting to wilt.
Right.
And the leaves are wilting. So that's why it's important that you condition it right away when you pick it, and or recut it and then put it in water. And
Would you remove those lower leaves and not leave as many, because the leaves take up a lot of water on hydrangeas?
well, no. There is some damage, but after it's conditioned and it sticks out the way it should, I would leave them on. Because the more sets of leaves, like at least 2 to 3, is better point quality for your specimen. And then you also should look behind to see if there's any damage. So you see the back, and if there's some browning or some petals that are kind of damaged, you could take a nipper and take the damaged parts out of there. There aren't too many people that exhibit dahlias because there is work to growing them and to get them to look nice. And when you condition dahlias, you cut the stem and then you put the stem a couple inches into boiling water for a few seconds and then right away into cold water. And then that will soften up this hard stem. And then they should look nice, and you could do that like a couple days before too. Now it's nice to see leaves on these dahlias. This is one thing that a lot of people, they'll just take the flower, cut it off and enter the flower, but you do need leaves here. But there's disqualifications, like they should be disbudded, like there should be only one flower on a stem. And like this one here, there's a bud growing here now. That should have been taken off quite a few weeks ago. And that will then make the main flower get bigger, because right now it is getting some energy which could be going to the main flower. But this has a real nice set of bracket of leaves.
So you would, right away when the buds are forming, you kind of pick out your main biggest bud and then take off the others on that stem.
Right, right. And then your main flower will be getting bigger. See, like here's another bud growing on the stem. That should be removed. But this has very good set of leaves. And the same way with this one. Now this is a nice long stem, but here's the bud should be disbudded, this one and this one. But this is a very nice bloom. And then we look in the back of the dahlias to see how they're filled out behind. And sometimes there might be some petals in the back here that really shouldn't be. So here's one that's the colors are it's not the right color for the back, so just carefully take it out. So a lot of times you can improve the way your flower looks by doing a few little tricks to take the damaged parts out. Like now in here, this one has a petal that's broken. So I would pull out the bad petal, which makes the back look lots better. Now this one is a little bit too far gone. You can kind of see that there's more and more petals in the back here are getting curled up. So that means that this flower is getting past its prime. But see, it really should have been disbudded, and then this one would have been in better condition. Okay. Okay, now here was another dahlia. Now this was a single dahlia. Most of these are the pom-pom or ball, and then we also have the single ones, which just have some petals around the outside. And here too, these should have been disbudded, but they got a good amount of leaves on there. Now glads, they're entered into different categories. There's like 100, 200, 300, 400, and 500. And that means that's the size of the flower. The 100s are the small ones or miniatures. This one is probably about a 200. It's a little bit bigger than a miniature, but it's still not as big as this one, which this one is probably like a 400. And this one would be like a 300 or a 400. Now when you buy your glad bulbs, you can check on there to make sure which size you should be in. Okay, now this one is very good. Now you should leave one leaf on there, so you have to go and cut down to the ground. So you leave the leaf on so it's attached to the stem. Okay, now this one, if you're counting 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, this one does not have enough flowers that are open. It's still a good stem, but it should have more open blooms. Now this one already had one flower that has been taken off, which is okay. You can take the bottom one off if it's kind of past its prime. Now this one I'll call 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. This one is about right, but they have taken off the tip of the stem, which kind of disqualifies it, because you should leave all the blooms and buds right on there. But otherwise, this one too, but it has a little tear in here. Maybe if you fix it up a little bit. Now this one has just a part of a stem. Now in this one, the flowers should be closer together on the stem. And I don't know if I have any that are twisted around. Sometimes they're not. Well, this one here, you have a flower that's open, then there's a bud, and then a flower. That's kind of a disqualification, because they should be all open and concession there.
Like this one, right?
Okay, like this one is kind of, you see it's twisted. Now you want the flowers to go straight on the stem. If it's kind of twisted, somehow, if you're very careful, you can turn these here to kind of face them, that so they're all facing in the same direction. This one is poor quality because it has two that have not opened and then another one. They should all be open right in a row. Now this one, I mean, this is really has nothing open, so this one really, it's a nice color flower, but it doesn't have a stem or a leaf, and it doesn't have any that are open.
And while we're talking about these, Janet,
Now when,
you mentioned how to straighten the tips.
okay, now if you don't stake them while they're growing, a lot of the glad growers, they will stake their glads in the garden, and they have this stake on them. And then a lot of them too, you will put like a little bamboo pole on there when you condition them, and you tape that pole to them when you condition them. Because glads, when you have them in the water and you put them like in a room, and if there's a light bulb to the side, the stems will go towards that light bulb, but you put this basket or container of glads right under the light bulb, the stems will go right straight up to the light, so that will straighten up that tip. So you got to be careful where your light is when you got them conditioning in the house. Now a lot of these, they're nice glads, but a lot of them, there's a fault, it seems, in most of them. They are not opening up the way they should.
Yeah, this one is
And sometimes that happens to be then a fault in the bulb or something happening. Okay, then we have house plants that are indoor house plants, and then we have patio or outside plants. And they all kind of go under the same kind of criteria. You want to have a nice pot, clean pots. That's one problem. A lot of times the pots are not clean, and they should be washed up, and the pot should complement your plant. One that's good for it, like this is a succulent, so this is a succulent looking container. And your leaves should be nice and clean, and so we could tell that there's nice growth. This is outside growing, and very healthy looking. And then one of the most important thing, all plants, they must be labeled. They must have the botanical name, so they have the genus and the species, and then the common name. And first it's the...
Well, I have the common name first on that one. False agave is. This is apparently a fairly new. It's a cross of agave and manfredas, and they have called them mangaves. But when I looked it up, it was just X mangave, because they can't decide how they want to classify it yet, I guess. But normally, yeah, make sure you have the botanical name, because when I've been clerking for judges, I can't tell you how many have been disqualified because they did not have a botanical name on there. So if you know the common name, it's easy enough to Google it and find the botanical name, and make sure this would, if I were exhibiting this, I would tape it either tape it to a popsicle stick or something and tuck it in here, or tape it to the pot so that the judges can see it easily.
And one thing that helps, whenever you buy your plants, save the tags that are in there. Vegetables, flowers, whatever, save your tags because they have all the names right on there. The botanical, the common, and the species, and how to take care of it. And you could use this as a tag, but it's better to write it out like that so people can see it when they walk by.
Yeah.
But make sure the containers are clean. You know, how many times I've seen where there's dirt in here that really should be cleaned out, or there's some leaves falling in there, so they should be clean. Okay, when it comes to getting vegetables ready for the fair, a lot of those can be done 2, 3, 4, 5 days or more ahead of time. If you do the proper conditioning, I mean, they will be just fine, so you don't have to stress yourself being out there. And a lot of times the vegetables, some of them are ready 4 or 5 days ahead of time, rather than waiting till see if they're ready like the day before the fair. Zucchini is one which you can really watch. I mean, every day it will change. And zucchini, this is the perfect size what we want to see at fair time. When it gets to be like this one is kind of misshapen, and they're already starting to lose their good flavor, and they aren't as good as an exhibit. This is the perfect size. Now you should have a stem on there, and every vegetable needs to have their stem left on except tomatoes. And the reason why you take the stem off the tomato is because usually when you pick your tomato, you put it in a pail. That stem will puncture the other tomato, and then you're already getting damage into it. But these stems are left on your vegetables because then they will keep the good flavor in, and they won't let air get in, and your good nutrition is going to stay in the vegetable. So every vegetable needs a stem left on. So when you're picking your vegetables, again, you're going to have to use your knife, so you'll be able to cut the stem. Now these should be cut just a little bit longer. Okay, and eggplant, this is the Ichabod, so that's a long, narrow one. And you want to pick your eggplant when it's a dark purple color. Once it starts losing a little bit of its color, that means that it's already losing a lot of the good nutritional value inside of it.
So this one is a little past prime now. It should be nice and firm and shiny.
Yep. It's been sitting out, and then with the heat now, this one has just gotten soft, which is not, should be.
Right.
But the color needs to be nice and dark.
Unless you have one of the white ones.
Yeah. Okay, now 5 days ago, I was at a place where we dug these carrots, and so I was going to see how they last. Now they weren't the best condition for exhibiting, but I washed them very carefully underwater, trying to get the dirt off. Now you got to be careful with beets and carrots. Do not use a brush or anything. You cannot scrape the skin because they do open up real easily with a scrape on there. So these 5 days ago, these were picked, and they're just perfect already for exhibiting. They're still okay. Now, I just broke the stems off. I didn't realize I was going to use them, so I should have left the stems a little bit longer, and then with the roots. And then if it has these little side roots, you pick them off, and you try to find usually 3 or 5 or 6, depends on what the entry
your premium book tells you.
Yeah, like for 4-H, they use 3 in that. So you want them to look the same. But these were picked 5 days ago and washed carefully, and then see how this damp paper towel had taken the dirt off without damaging them. And then wrap your carrots in the damp paper towel, put them back into a plastic bag, Ziploc bag, and they can stay there 3, 4, 5 days, and you can even bring them to the fair in the bag like this, so you know they're going to stay nice and dark, and they don't get so dried out then. The beets are done the same way. These were picked 5 days ago also, they're still pretty good condition, so we just trim the tops off. And then if there's any bad leaves on the side, you trim that off. And then like the beets and carrots, if it has all these little hairs on there, make sure this is all trimmed off.
So just kind of clean them off with your fingers. 'Cause
Yep.
I assume you don't want to break the skin on them.
And also, okay, these two are pretty good size, so. And then when you're looking at your roots, if it's pretty long, you want to trim it off just a little bit. And if you got several of them, you want them all to be about the same length, so that they'll all look the same now. And then wrap them up again also in your damp paper towel in the plastic bag, and they will be ready for you for entry day. Okay, green beans. We like to see nice straight green beans as entries, but if you happen to find one that matches a nice straight one, but it's crooked, there's a little trick which you can do in conditioning and getting it ready to make it straight for the fair. You got to start the day before, and you pick them, and you got to make sure that the stem is left on. So that's another vegetable you got to take your knife or scissors with you into the garden. So what you do, you have a plate, and you take and you tape this bean straight on this plate. And it has to be the day before, because it has to have time to get nice and straight. So you just tape it down very carefully. And it's going to be straight on your plate. I don't know if you see, now it's laying straight here. And then you take a damp paper towel, and damp paper towel, put it over your beans, slip it in a Ziploc bag, put it in the refrigerator overnight, and then the next day you're going to have a nice straight green bean for entry day.
Wow, things I wish I had known sooner. This one goes in that category. Back when my kids were in 4-H.
Okay, there's kohlrabi. This is kind of a new vegetable that people are starting to reinvent and use. And there are 4 vegetables that you do not wash: cauliflower, kohlrabi, cucumbers, and onions. Because those 4, they damage very easily, and so you do not wash those 4 vegetables. But the others you can very carefully wash so they're nice and clean. Now the kohlrabi, you cut the root close to the base, but you want to leave some stem on, because there again the stem or the root protects the kohlrabi from losing its nutrient value. And then trim off or trim down your major stems. Okay, but you want to leave
So just a
5
few
or
in the
6,
center,
but you
huh?
trim them to 1 or 2 inches. So they should be about 1 or 2 inches tall. And there's your kohlrabi. So that's one that you do not wash. Another one that you don't wash are the cucumbers. Now this would be probably a little mini dill or that, so you got to make sure you're in the right category. If you are going to be entering a slicer, that means it should be a big one ready for slicing. This would not be entered in a slicing category. And if it has the blossom, take it off, because we want to keep the little spurs on there. And you have to take a scissor or knife so the stems are left on.
is this one
So
sharper?
these are probably more tedious to pick. But these two could be picked, you know, you watch them. If you pick one 3 days ago and then the next 2 days later, the rest of them match. And if they're kept in a refrigerator, loosely wrap these in a paper towel and put them in a plastic bag and they'll be okay in the refrigerator.
Okay.
Okay, and then the onions. Now this was picked on Sunday also. It's not really ready for harvest because when you're harvesting your onions, you want the top to be completely brown, such as what it's on the garlic here. You want that be dried off because if this is still green, and if you're going to store this for winter, the center, it's going to rot. So that's why you got to keep or wait until it is completely dried off. Now, as the onion is growing, this is one plant where when you're hoeing, take the dirt away from it. Like a carrot, you should keep putting, carrot and beets, put the dirt up around the plant so they don't get the green on there. But an onion, you can keep taking the dirt off. That way they will be getting a hard, dry skin when they're ready to harvest. So then, when they're picked and dried, this should be dry. You take, getting it ready, you take the roots and pull them out. And then trim off a little bit off the bottom, but put them all so they're all going in one direction, like the nice higher dry shell.
So you kind of comb them with your fingers.
Yeah, and then the stems on them should be about this tall if they're dry. But this one has a nice dry skin already, but it isn't, the stem isn't dry enough. Okay, now the garlic and basil, those are going to be in the flower department now. We have entries for garlic bulbs, and now these were just picked. So because they're dry, and there too you kind of clean it off. You want the dry skin, and then trim them off, and then too with the roots the same thing, pull it down and clean them out. And cut them down. Now if you have some of these, like you can't wash these, a paintbrush works very well to clean off like your onions and the ones you can't wash. So your garlic would look something like this when it would be exhibited.
Okay, and those were just harvested a few days ago, so they are not dried down yet. Normally I would wait to clean them until they are dried down.
Okay, and then we got also basil in the flower division. Now we got like specimens, 6 specimens, like there's some basil. Now it's sitting in the sun here, there's just wilted to pieces. And so you want to make sure too that they're all about the same height, and there's 6 specimens. So I would cut them, and no leaves below the water line. So you have 6 pretty even looking stems when you get in to the fair. Now these should be fresh. Now if this is the way it looked when you brought it at the fair, it would not get anything. But they did look good until we got out into the sun.
Yeah, preferably pick them early morning when it's cool or late evening.
Yeah, so you'd be
condition
needing,
them.
so that's the new entry is 6 specimens. I mean, you could have basil, oregano, chives. I think there's about 14 different kinds. And then it's a potted
rosemary
plant, and then a container of 3 or more different herbs.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us in the garden today. I hope you've learned some tips that'll help you improve your exhibits at the fair, and we'll see you next time in the garden.